Okay, everybody. Today is a last minute special treat from I think the top chat that we have here is Q&A with Great Uncle Randall. How do you feel
Great.
about being called Great Uncle?
Well, I have been an uncle for some time now, so I've kind of gotten used to it. It still feels a little weird because inside this old decrepit exterior, I'm still an 18-year-old, ready to
Well,
get out and take on the world.
yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it's awesome. This is a special one because we're talking sacred geometry tonight. And I know a lot of people have a lot of questions for you about this, Randall, but I mean, when did you first start studying sacred geometry?
1973. I can
Ooh.
pinpoint it right down to the year because it was a publication that I acquired that introduced me to some of the concepts of sacred geometry, and I've told this story, so I'm not going to reiterate it here because we're not going into a long marathon live stream tonight. But I got involved in 72 building two of the Buckminster Fuller geodesic domes, uh, along with my two brothers as a weird cult that we belonged to at the time. Although it wasn't really a weird cult, but it was an interesting group of people. There was an architect in the group who was very much a student of Buckminster Fuller, and he designed two domes. And one was based on the geometry of a spire on an Islamic mosque. And the challenge of figuring out how to frame that thing using that particular geometry, I found really interesting. And in the aftermath of that, that was what, the summer of 1972. Oh, about a year later, I guess, in 1973, this publication came out called Shelter, which was a large format, almost, yeah, you could even pull it up because I think they've reissued it. But Shelter, it's large format, and this one of the two domes, we called it the Bindu Dome, was featured in that publication. And because I had a hand in it, and my little brother Rowan, who's my business partner today, was the lead carpenter on that. And so there were a couple of photographs. They gave a full page spread on this particular dome and the geometry and stuff that went into it, and several photographs in there that are. I could even pull one of them up. They're interesting. Historically, I mean, that was that time back then. But so when the publication came out, because of the fact that this project I had worked on was featured in there, I procured a copy. And in there was a lot of information about what I would call vernacular architecture, which is essentially the architecture of different cultures and different groups, different societies, and how architecture was used to serve as an interface between people and their environment, and in the
Mm.
various ways that people in different climates and different environments and so on were able to solve that problem to some to a degree or another. And so, but a lot of it dealt with the geometry that was used in some of these buildings. And one of them talked about the geometry of Gothic cathedrals. One of them talked about one of the reviews or articles in that publication talked about uh, the geometry of the Islamic geometry,
Mm.
like in Turkish mosques and places like that. In particular, well, I found that just immensely fascinating, and that was the first place I ever actually had learned about um, the golden section, sometimes called the divine proportion. Um, Actually, some of that stuff I had been exposed to, but I'd kind of forgotten it because some people here may remember. What was it? Oh, yes. Donald in Math Magic Land.
Donald in Math Magic Land. Everybody in the chat, you guys know Donald in Math Magic Land?
I bet
And
you some of the older folks in there may know what I'm talking about.
so
I used
uh
to, when I,
one second, Randall. While you guys are looking up Donald in Math Magic Land, drop your questions in the chat. So this is going to be a Q and A format. So
mm,
in the X live chat as well as the YouTube live chat. Drop your questions in here, and I'm going to be trying to pick up as many as I can from the chat and asking them to Randall. So keep them as much as you can. It's supposed to be sacred geometry focused, and we're going to try to get through as many questions as possible. But here's one, Randall. First thing, are you familiar with Dolores Cannon's work? This is a question from Teeny4.
It sounds familiar, but I won't feign familiarity just on the basis of it sounding familiar. Dolores Cannon. No, I can't say I am. Tell me more about Dolores Cannon.
It looks like Dolores Cannon is an American author that is a hypnotherapist, trained hypnotherapist. And I don't know too much about her. I've heard the name, but I can say I'm familiar with the name, but same as you, not too familiar with the work.
Now, I'm guessing there's a connection there with geometry, sacred geometry. Does she hypnotize people and they have experiences of? I know people oftentimes, like particularly, you'll find out in Carl Jung when he would work with people in a therapeutic session. Oftentimes, he would find out about dreams, and sometimes geometric forms would express themselves through dreams and so on. But yeah, I don't know what the connection would be there, but I'm guessing there is one.
Maybe. Maybe. Thank you, everybody, for the questions in the chat. Okay, all right. We got one that I think's unrelated, but it's the first question we had here. So what are your thoughts on, if you know about this, Matt LaCroix and his work on Lake Van?
Well, I'm only marginally familiar with it. So far, what I've learned from Matt himself is that there's probably some merit to it. Yeah, I'm not going to. Yeah, again, I had the opportunity to actually travel with him when he was going over there to explore it, but I just at the time I was already stretched way too thin and overcommitted, so I had to pass up on that. But I'm actually looking forward to seeing what his latest updates are on that.
Okay. So here we go. Here's a set of two questions from David Turner, but I think they're headed towards the same thing. It's, Randall, how would you describe the unseen that Socrates defines from perspective? And how would you describe the Trinity that Socrates defines by perspective?
Through perspective. I mean, we're talking about, when you say perspective, read the question.
How would you
again.
describe the unseen that Socrates defines from perspectives?
From perspectives. Well, I haven't read it.
Okay. Are you familiar with the Trinity that Socrates describes?
No, I'm certainly familiar with the Trinity from the Christian Trinity. I'm familiar with the Hindu Trinity and some of the others. I've certainly studied into both of those. Socrates' Trinity, I would love to take a closer look at it and see how it fits into the whole universal conception. And of course, in geometry, the equilateral triangle is essentially the first object that we get that actually has vertices in it. You can't, and encloses space. You can't. So when you have you need a minimum of three sides to enclose a space, and that's where it starts. So we always, first thing exercise that we do in a geometry program is learn to draw the vesica and then see how the vesica piscis, or vessel of the fish, which is actually the first proposition of Euclidean geometry, because it solves two axioms simultaneously. One is that all radii of the same circle are equal, and two things equal to the same third thing are equal to each other. And when you put those two things together, you basically, geometrically, it expresses itself as an equilateral triangle. And then from that equilateral triangle and the form of the vesica, you can then generate 60-degree angles and 90-degree angles. With the combination of those two, you can generate an infinity of other angles, right? So that's where it starts. It starts with the overlap of two circles, and then from that overlap, you get the equilateral triangle. And then in the Hindu Trinity, it's um, Brahma, who creates, Vishnu, who preserves, and Shiva, who destroys. And that's the Trinitarian cycle. So that forms a huge framework of my thinking about how you apply these archetypal principles to our life as individuals, as our life as a civilization, trying to come up with a way to endure on this planet that we happen to inhabit, right?
So there's something divine about the Trinity there. It sounds like it's a starting point for these patterns that you're
Yeah,
exploring.
and then of course in masonry, we have pillars, we have columns, three columns that are represented by three concepts: wisdom, strength, and beauty. Wisdom to conceive, strength to execute, and beauty to adorn every great and laudable undertaking. So, and in architecture, engineering, and building, in order to have a stable structural system, you need a minimum of three legs on the stool, three columns stabilizing the structure. And if you got a square, squares aren't stable because squares, if you got a right angle, it's a square. You put stress on it, it can actually collapse. But if you want your square to be stable, you put the diagonal in, and now it's two triangles, and now you've got stability. So that's kind of my conception of the Trinity in the sense. And then, of course, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. What does that mean from Christianity? Well, that gets into rather a long dissertation that would take us far afield from the time slot or time we've got available to us. But it's certainly worthy of diving into it because number one, I'll say this much: when you're talking about these terms, Father, Pater, Son, Huios, Holy Ghost, etc., when you're looking at those, let's say in the original, those words in the original. Now, in this case, we find them, say, in the Greek New Testament. What we know about the Greek language, like the Hebrew language, like the Arabic, is that prior to, before the advent of the Hindu-Arabic numeral system that we use today, I think around maybe the 5th century, 6th century AD, right in there, the same set of symbols, like now when our counting numbers are a set of symbols, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc., based on a denary system, units, tens, and hundreds. Our letters of the alphabet in our English, we got 26 letters in the alphabet, and those essentially are, articulations of sound that we put together in various combinations in order to convey meaning to each other, right? But there are two distinct functions between our counting numbers and our arithmetic numbers and so on, and the language that we speak. Prior to the advent of the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, the same set of symbols served a dual purpose. They were the letters of the alphabet, but they were also the counting numbers, the integral values. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, you could say, well, there's historical significance to it because, it would make sense. Maybe you'd use the same set of symbols for this dual purpose until somebody figured out, well, hey, maybe it would be more convenient if we had this set of symbols for numbers and numerical calculations and counting and this and that, and we use this set of symbols for our spoken language and our written language, right? Well, when you go back pre-Hindu-Arabic numeral system, it means that when you look at these ancient writings, particularly the writings that we would perhaps define as scriptural or sacred writings, what is it that qualifies them for that definition? Well, one of the main criteria, I would argue, is the fact that authentically sacred writings have dual layers, have multiple layers of meaning, if that makes sense, multiple layers of meaning. And when you take the outer form of the writing, which is essentially a story, which is an allegory, its moral teachings and so on, but it's all represented in a literary form with a cast of characters and plots and subplots and all of that. Now, peel back that layer, and the assumption is if anybody thinks about it, well, why would you do that? What else is there? There it is. It's all right there, what you see on the surface. But that's not the case. Mm-hmm. You peel that layer, and what it is that every word, every name, phrases, etc., all have numerical values. Okay? Now, one would assume that they're just random numerical values because you can take, let's say, the word Yahweh, very simple one. Yud, he, vav, he. Yud, he, vav, he. Yud, he, vav, he is the word that we essentially that we would say in American or English, Jehovah, right? That's Jehovah, Yahweh. You know, right. In the Hebrew, it's more like Yahweh. It's spelled Yud, which is the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, followed by the letter He, which has the value of 5, the letter Vav, which has the value of 6, and then a final He, which is number 5 again. Add those up and you get 26. So that's just an example. Now, what's the significance of the fact that it adds up to 26? Well, there may or may not be. It depends on context. But here's the thing, that you can't, I'm just citing that as a simple example that anybody can, oh yeah, okay, you got 10 plus 5 plus 6 plus 5. Okay, but here's the thing. The key numbers and words and phrases have significant and meaningful numerical values when taken in context. And what they do is they essentially, if you take those numbers and you think of them, for example, as numbers measuring time and space, well, that's when you begin to see the significance of it. That the numbers, many of the numbers that you extract from these, say, an allegory of, let's say the holy city that's described descending from heaven in the book of Revelation. When you look at that now, in terms of the numerical values that are associated with the phraseology and the word, like holy city, for example, it has a Greek spelling. What you discover is that those numbers represent geometric forms. And those are exactly the geometric forms that we are studying in sacred geometry. They're the same geometric forms that we find expressed through ancient sacred architecture. And they're the same geometric forms that we actually find describing the dimensions and proportions of the solar system that we inhabit. And it looks like then that as we understand more and more about the parameters of our existence within this world, it definitely goes beyond the planet.
Well,
and
I think this is a great segue into one of the questions that we have from Blake. And Blake asked, are we seeing sacred geometry patterns in quantum analysis and computing?
Ooh, that's another one. God, what's some question? Now I've got homework to do. My thought would be, I would guess yes. Don't ask me to make an argument in favor of that. But Beckett, could you save that question?
Yes, I'll save it. Good question, Blake.
I would like to, because wouldn't that be the next level? I mean, it almost seems to me like it's the logical next level.
Yeah. And there's been some crazy news about quantum computing. Did you, not to derail us there, but did you see the quantum chip that Microsoft
Not yet.
Been developing? Oh, well, that's another thing we'll have to get into here, but
Okay.
I'll keep working through these questions that we got. So we got one from John P. And John P.'s question is, how much sacred geometry was implemented in the state capitals? And I think he'd be referring to when they were building the state capitals.
Yeah, well, and it goes beyond the capital. It goes into the city layout of Washington, D.C. We find a consistent pattern of astronomical alignments and geometry. Now, that would be, I should actually incorporate that into some of the sacred geometry lessons, because if I had the floor plan in front of me, I could show you what the relations are. One of the first things we get into in a sacred geometry workshop is learning the principles of dynamic symmetry, as it was called by J. Hambidge, who was an illustrator who rediscovered in the early part of the 20th century a major part of the ancient system. He called it dynamic symmetry, but there's pretty much almost not quite synonymous with sacred geometry, but it was a form of partitioning, working with irrational, or I prefer the word transcendental numbers, where are numbers that, like pi, everybody knows that the number pi, the value, now the number is the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter. And that's consistent. It doesn't matter the size of the circle or where it's drawn or any of that. As long as it's a circle, and we assume that with one of these instruments here, we can draw a circle with mathematic precision. Now, of course, if we look at it on a microscopic scale, we'd probably see some errors, right? But the idea is you draw with one of these, and you can presume, for the sake of calculation, that you've drawn a perfect circle. Now, there's a way you can go through it and you can work and get to what the value of pi is, which is 3.14159, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Well, how do you do that? Well, what you do is a series of successive polygons with an increasing number of sides. And you can picture in your mind, if you go from a hexagon to a decagon, which is 10, to a dodecagon, and you go through all of the polygons, let's say doubling the number of sides, at some point you get so many sides in the polygon that it's indistinguishable from a circle. And you can keep adding sides. You'll never, ever get to an exact mathematical circle, right? Mm-hmm. But at some point you go, okay, this is close enough. I'm going to build a tower, a circular tower. I don't need my precision to the extent of looking at a 10,000th or 100,000th of an inch, right? But so you can calculate, you can get that, right? You can get the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter, the ratio of the side of a square to its diagonal, right? Now, you take that relationship, the side of a square and its diagonal, and you can build a whole series of nested rectangles that carry this sequence of ratios. Because what you'll get is that you'll get the square root of 2 to 1, because we'll go through this in the workshop. People, it's important that they really get this to understand the system and to work with it. But you basically just create a square, and then you take its diagonal, and from that you create a rectangle. Now you can do a simple, quick calculation, and you will find out that the ratio of the diagonal of a square to its side is 1.4143256 something like that. But like pi, it goes forever. It goes forever. It doesn't repeat. The pattern of numbers never repeats, and it doesn't terminate. So it's in this category of numbers. The square root of 3 is the same thing, 1.732050808, something like that. But for practical purposes, there's no reason to go beyond 1.732 as a ratio, the root 3 ratio. Where do you find the root 3 ratio? Well, it's the ratio of the long axis of the vesica to its width. See? So it shows up naturally in a geometric process, in a geometric progression. So here's the thing. You've got this whole schemata of these rectangles that you can also use, because you can also generate arcs and circles and so forth within that. You're not a slave to the square corner, right? Once you know how to work the system, you can easily get from the right angle corner to virtually any angle you want, or curves, arcs, if you want to work with arcs. But so what I'm getting at, there's this whole system of root rectangles that are embedded, that have been used over and over again in sacred architecture throughout the ages and across the world. And you can find those relationships, back to the question, you can find those relationships in the capital. But I don't have a graphic here to illustrate and show it. But yeah,
they knew something when they were building it.
Well, understand that I'm guessing that there was probably a Masonic influence there. I mean, we certainly know that there is a Masonic cornerstone on the northeast corner of the nation's capital. So,
Okay, we got more questions here, and I'll say this for everybody in the chat. We're looking at a pretty hard-ish stop in 25 minutes, just so everybody's aware. So get your questions in. We'll try and get through all of them. We'll probably stop taking them with 10 minutes left because we've already got a good amount built up. Okay, so we've got a question from John P. Carbons Jr. What relationship do you find between sacred geometry and schematics, rosette windows, frequency, and vibrations?
well, for example, let's see, I could actually even perhaps do a share screen here. The frequencies of the colors in the visible light spectrum show the same relations that I was just describing. Let's see, I think I've got one that I could grab, pull it up pretty quick here. I presented at the Cosmic Summit, we looked into this very briefly. Let's see, maybe I've got it right here. If I've got it, we can look at it. And let's see here. No, it wasn't.
You are all asking some great questions. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. And Randall's, you're pretty much gearing up to go to this retreat. While you're pulling that up, you're heading out in the next 48 to 72 hours, right, to head over to Tennessee?
Yes, because I mean, we kick it off with a lecture Friday night, and then we're going to go out for a little viewing because you're up on the plateau there, and it's nice and clear skies we're hoping for, and we can see the grand planetary alignment. And this is a good way. I can still remember my first really closely following the motions of the heavens was when I witnessed a Mars-Saturn conjunction. And they were very, very close in the sky, and it was really impressive. And I had never really, before that in my life, had never really looked at and had seen a conjunction. So when I saw that conjunction, I was very fascinated. So I had Saturn and I had Mars. And so now I started watching consistently over the months and the years, and I was able to track Mars moving much faster, of course, than Saturn. Then, in the course of the month, the moon would come sailing by. And then I could start to get the sense of the plane of the ecliptic. And then, of course, you have Jupiter and you have Venus and you have the sun. So seeing that conjunction was my entrance into the celestial wheel, if you will. I jumped on the merry-go-round at that point, the cosmic merry-go-round, and I've been riding it ever since. Now, this grand planetary conjunction will be a really ideal point for somebody who really wants to immerse themselves in their consciousness into the wheels within wheels of cosmic motion that ultimately govern the cycles, the numbers, the frequencies, everything here below on this planetary surface, from the diurnal or daily rotation of the Earth on its axis, its seasonal changes throughout the course of the year. All of that is a function of the greater system of which we are a part. The tides that bring the ocean in and out and create that magical zone between marine and between terrestrial, where life could emerge from the watery matrix in which it was originally seeded and get up to the terrestrial existence. But in order, it's the same thing in geometry. We have the mean, the golden mean, for example, where if you have two things that you just can't somehow connect them and make them fit together, you introduce this other third value that has the power of reconciling those irreconcilable things. Well, marine and terrestrial is like that, so you have to have that zone, that intermediary, transitionary zone between the two domains, between the two worlds. The moon provides us with that, see. Without the moon, there's no intertidal zone, and without that intertidal zone, now it's going to be way more challenging for life to get out of the oceans and onto the land. So if you want to have a world system that is optimum for creating higher levels of intelligence and consciousness, yes, you want to have a moon. You actually, the moon, you could say, is indispensable. And then, of course, once the consciousness of life has evolved to the point where it can now begin actually leaving the terrestrial nest and go back to a cosmic existence, at that point, the role of the moon becomes indispensable as well. As Kraft Ericke said, if God had not intended man, humankind, to become spacefaring, he wouldn't have given us the moon. Because that makes it much more and see, and of course,
It's the launching pad.
it turns right out. It turns out that when you look at the relationship between the Earth and the moon, it's the diameters of the two objects, the mass of the two objects, and the distances. It's all enshrined within sacred geometry.
Here's another one. You've kind of danced on the answer to this question in a couple of different ways. It's from Benjamin Fairhall. He said, sacred geometry, for context, sacred geometry in relation to pyramids. Being that two numbers make a coincidence and three numbers form a relationship, would you say that the pyramids SG form a sacred, the pyramid sacred geometry form a defined relationship?
Sure. And one of the things I love to get into is looking at the geometry of the pyramids. And of course, the most famous is Khufu's pyramid. And that is, like, to me, a premier manifestation of sacred geometry expressed in three-dimensional form. And it has to do with the ratio of its height to the perimeter of its base, primarily. But you find embedded in the design and proportions of Khufu's pyramid not only pi, the ratio of the circumference to the diameter of a circle, but you find phi or phi, depending on which dialect. Phi or phi, the Greek letter phi, I prefer phi, but you find that as well, which is again, that's the so-called divine proportion. And it's perfectly manifested in 3D form in the Great Pyramid. And it has to do with that angle of slope to base of 51.84 degrees. And in sacred geometry workshops and classes, we dive deeply into those relationships. Now, there's many structures and temples, many more that I haven't looked at and analyzed than the ones I have. But the ones I have are pretty much strong verification that the system was used throughout. You know, we'll typically look at the Osirian, for example, which is in Egypt, and its relationship to pentagonal geometry and what the significance and symbolism behind that might mean. But yeah, sacred geometry is the key to deciphering the hidden meanings of ancient architecture, sacred architecture, that which we would consider sacred. It's also the key to understanding the hidden underlying mathematical interpretation of sacred writings. And when you realize that they're basically just two ways of expressing, you've got the geometry, the forms that generate number, particularly, like, I'll take an example. When you look at a cube, right, you have internal and exterior angles. You have the sum of the interior angles of a cube are 2,160 degrees, right? You've got 90, 90, and 90 around each of the corners, 270 degrees times 8 because you've got 8 corners. On the inside, the internal geometry, the measure of the angles of each vertice, and that totality will describe all of your polygons, both your regular polygons and your irregular polygons, or rather polyhedra. Polyhedra is the third dimensional. Polygon is two-dimensional, right? But first you create the two-dimensional, the polygons, and then you essentially fold them from a two-dimensional up into a third dimension, and then you start getting the three-dimensional, which is where we begin to see crystalline structure. We begin to see even biological systems using particularly the relationship, say, between hexagonal geometry and pentagonal geometry, like as the base at the forms the fundamental geometry of the nucleotide bases in a DNA helix. But when you look going back to the cube, you look at that the totality, the total number of degrees in a cube. It's 2,160 degrees. Well, that has interesting correlations because 2,160 gives you 1/12 of the precessional cycle. So if you're looking at the precessional cycle, sometimes referred to as the Great Year, as a model, sort of a macroscopic counterpart to our own system. Again, I remember wheels within wheels, the lesser wheels within the greater wheels. Well, yeah, so to the ancients, peoples all over the world, they saw this cycle. They could tell the movement of the equinoxes and the solstices through the plane of the ecliptic over a period of slightly less than 26,000 years. But the point was, is they saw that there were numbers. They saw that there's a geometric rationale to dividing a circle into 12. So this is what they did. Our whole astrological model is the division of the full circle of the sun's journey through the course of a year divided into 12. Well, then you look at the equinoxes and the solstices, which is the great cosmic cross that governs the seasons. It's moving slowly through those 12 signs, and it spends 2,160 years in each of the 12 signs. So 2,160 times 12 gives you 25,920, which is almost spot on to the precessional cycle, right? So what's the insight here? The insight is that we have numbers. The same number measures not only the time that it takes for the vernal equinox to move 30 degrees, it also measures the internal angles of a cube. Now, this is very significant because here is where those angles can influence frequencies. Those angles can influence vibratory phenomena beyond what we can talk about here. But we do get into that in the workshops.
Yeah. So here's, I'm going to skip around here with some of these questions to go to the super chats. First of all, Black Box, thank you for the support. And there's a question from OG Man's Fan 69. There we go. He said, "Can you elaborate on the relationship with sacred geometry and Malcolm's thunderstorm generator?"
Well, okay, so I was just basically hinting at that.
Yep.
Well, that's exactly what I was doing, and yes, I can do that. I don't know if I would be able to do that in the context of this, but yes, there's no doubt that there's a connection there because the frequencies that lead to coherency of the plasma, the free-flowing plasma streams into coherent plasmoids are essentially the same. The frequencies are the same numbers that we find repeatedly over and over again.
Yeah, and Malcolm, if you guys haven't seen it, it's on his website. It could be on your website too, but Malcolm has a chart, a graphic that it maps out a lot of these numbers and their relationships to atoms and elements for the plasmoid
that is the plasmoid
model.
unification model.
Yes.
And I have some really great posters that are enlarged, laminated posters. If anybody's interested in acquiring one, let me tell you, the study of that is it's worth some in-depth study because it really brings in information from multiple different systems and legacies, both scientific, archaic, and it unifies them. It shows these interrelationships, like the example I just gave. Well, imagine that multiplied by hundreds of examples like that, and so this plasma unification model really is a way of displaying that in a sort of in a coherent manner that you can actually begin to see the interrelations. So if anybody's interested in that, yeah, I've got those. I don't know how many I have left. I may not have that many left, but yeah, I've got some for sale if anybody is interested.
Yeah, you can get those on the website. So, and guys, we've got about 10 minutes left here, and so we're limited in the amount of time and depth that Randall can go into each of your questions, but the Sacred Geometry Retreat, where Randall's going deep on a lot of these questions and a lot more interesting things. That's on the 28th. So if you guys want essentially 3-day format, lots and lots of time to ask questions, to get deep knowledge on this, you guys can check that out. We got the link in the bio or in the description for tickets there. But I'm going to keep trying to get through some of these questions. Okay, so Okay, here's one. You just kind of answered this wheel within a wheel within a wheel. How would fractals be related with sacred geometry? And I'll just keep rolling through them. Do you have any experience with schematics as they relate to sacred geometry?
Schematics or cymatics?
Excuse me, cymatics.
Yeah, not a lot. I mean, I've certainly. I'll tell you what I've seen. I've seen a lot of the videos with various tones and how they create the shape. Yes, that's a very very interesting expression. I wish there was a way I could actually do that in workshops to demonstrate. I've known people that had setups where they could actually tune the vibrations on a metal plate, and you could see for yourself that a fine grain material like fine sand or something could actually form coherent geometric patterns. And that's kind of what we're talking about here by subjecting incoherent, disorganized plasmas to forming coherent, self-organized plasmoids. It's totally a function of frequency. Could I do, because we're talking about this, could I do a very quick share screen here? Do I
Yeah.
have, okay, I just show very quickly this, let's see, okay, I don't, oh, there we go, there it showed up. Let's see, window, here we go. All right, are we seeing this? This is the
We
plasmoid,
are.
yeah, this is the plasmoid unification model. Now, check this out. Okay, so I was just talking. I don't know if people can see this or not. Let's see. It's pretty small on my computer. I could probably change that. But like down here, you see sun, earth, moon. Well, when we measure the diameter of the moon in miles, not kilometers, not something else, miles, the ancient imperial system of measuring that we still use today, which includes miles, yards, feet, inches, acres, hectares, and so on. When we use miles, the diameter of the moon is 2,160 miles. And this is shown down here in the fundamental numbers. Matter is alternating current energy in motion, right? So if you go around here, all the numbers you find embedded in sacred architecture, in sacred writings, in metaphors, and things that have come down to us from the past, along with the vibrational frequencies of matter and energy, all in this model right here. And it's one that's essentially, I think, worthy of a lot of study.
It'll take a lot of study, too.
Yeah, it integrates so many things. Yeah, right here, the moon, 2,160 miles. Sun, 864,000 miles.
It's interesting stuff.
And notice the array of colors, and then the vibratory frequency of the colors. So,
Here's another one, Randall. A little bit different type of question. I don't know how to pronounce this name, so forgive me. Andrzej Zirek. Hi, Randall. I have a question. What do you think about the signs and fields left all over the world? They have a lot of geometry. I think he's talking about crop circles here.
oh, of course he's talking, right? Yeah, that's sure. And they are pure geometry. So, oh boy, the crop circles. So, I would love to talk about the crop circles and some thoughts. Problem is, we don't have enough time to do it justice. Other than, yes, they are geometric, and what we should be asking is, what is ultimately the origin of them? Obviously, they're intelligence, right? You don't get something like that by random events that might happen out in the field. The question is, what's the source of that intelligence? Is it two guys, Doug and Dave, or whoever, sneaking out into the field at night with ropes and planks and stomping down the, well, maybe in some of the really primitive ones, it was Doug and Dave. But when you start seeing these elaborate, expansive, complex geometric forms out there, you go, okay, it's got to be more than Doug and Dave. Now, if it's humans, if people are behind it, they have really figured out some effective ways to do it very efficiently and quickly and not get caught. not ever get caught in the act, right? Now, as a builder, I do, surveying. We have to lay out a building site, right, before we build. Like, say, let's say I'm going to build a house, and it's not just a simple square. It's maybe offsets and rectangles and so forth. That all has to be laid out. You use, in the case we would use a theodolite or a surveyor's transit, and we would use, our fiberglass tapes, et cetera. We would use lasers. We use lasers. And so we'd go out there, and let's say there's three of us working, and we're laying out a standard. It would take a good day. Like if it's a fairly mid-range complexity of a floor plan on a house with some offsets, maybe there's a bump out octagonal, sitting area or something with windows. We built a lot of those kind of things. But so now you got to lay all that out. You have to have strings following the outline of the building. You have to have strings showing the disposition of the rooms and wherever, for example, you're going to need to have supporting, like where you're going to have structural piers. That all has to be marked. So you essentially do the whole template of the building in string and what we call batter boards, which hold the strings erect, so that not only are they forming the geometry, but they're also level and so on. Now, if we get out there, three of us, mid-size, we'll allow a whole day. It'll pretty much take a whole day. We're out there in the daytime. We're not having to be, there's no subterfuge. We're not having to not get caught. Now, if we were going to do that at night, yeah, it would be more complicated. Obviously, if we were going to have to do that at night, we'd have to have night goggles and all kinds of things, right? We couldn't just go out at night. Obviously, we don't do that. But whoever or whatever is behind the crop circles is able to go out and create these incredibly geometrically precise patterns in the field and not get caught. Now, if somebody said to me, here's a challenge, I'll give you $1 million if next summer you can go out in the field and create a form, a pattern of similar complexity as the ones we're finding. You have one night to do it and you can't get caught. If you get caught, you don't get the $1 million. If it takes you more than a night, you don't get the $1 million. So then I would go, okay, how the hell do I do that? Well, the first thing I would have to do is I would have to assemble a team. And then we would have to come up with a geometry. And then in order to pull it off without a hitch, we would have to practice and practice and practice and practice. We wouldn't just go, okay, we're going to do this, and we're all going to go out in this field at night with our night goggle visions, and we're going to do this whole thing to lay out this whole elegant geometry and be gone before the sun comes up.
It's just a group of masons going out in the middle of the night. They've
I wish
organized
it was that.
around this.
I wish it was that. So here's the thing. Okay, you always start in science. You start with Occam's razor. What is the most down to earth, most prosaic explanation that you can come up with? Well, first thing is, okay, and in your the skeptic would up and say, well, it's people doing it. Well, okay, let's follow that line of thought. And what you end up with is, my God, how in the hell are they pulling it off? Hundreds of examples now, and never get caught. You're going to have to bring in a busload of people, park on a road. You're going to have to all hike out together into the middle of the field with all your equipment, whatever you're using, somehow set it up and do this whole thing and then be gone by morning. Well, okay, maybe there's a way. And maybe, right? Personally, because I have some familiarity with the processes and methods involved in something like that, it strikes me as being something that's so astronomically complicated to do, to pull off. So then if you say, okay, well, it seems to be very implausible that they could do this over and over and over again without ever getting caught, what would be another explanation that's not even more bizarre than that? What do you get to? Well, that's something that I like to get into, but, some of these things are just, they get into, the implications of them are so mind-boggling that I prefer to disclose it in a sort of an incremental fashion, because again, I'm not going to say I have any final knowledge on it, but I have some ideas and some thoughts that over and over again over the past, say, decade, look to me like they're going in the direction that we should be seeking an answer to this. And what I prefer to do, and Socrates came up, so part of the Socratic method is you don't just tell people what the solution to the problem is. You make them work through the problem and ideally to find the solution on their own rather than just telling them. Because you can just tell them, oh, no, okay, that's the answer to the problem. But now what you're doing is you're depriving them of developing the proficiency for themselves to solve problems. Like I could give you a problem, I could give you an equation to solve in algebra, right? And I could just tell you what the answer is. X is equal to whatever. Okay, fine. Now you got the right answer. But you have not had that process of working through and solving, knowing how to solve that problem and how to create the mental constructs that will allow you to solve other problems of similar or even greater complexity. So part of the way I teach is that I don't just dish out answers to problems. You want
It's
the
so
answer to this
valuable.
problem? I'm going to make you work for it a little bit, because by working for it a little bit, you're actually deriving way more benefit than if I just spoon fed you an answer. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of
Okay.
sense. Teach a man to fish or fish for him. Same idea.
Yeah.
So, Randall, we're here at 9 o'clock, and you've got an exciting next 7, 8 days. What's on the horizon for you for the Sacred Geometry retreat?
We'll be assembling Friday night, Friday evening. People will be arriving Friday during the day at Beersheba Springs Assembly up on the beautiful Cumberland Plateau, historic retreat resort. Um, and we'll have a lecture, and we'll be talking about some of these very things that we just were talking about here tonight, but with slides and visuals to go along with it, because geometry is very much visual when you're getting into it. And then Saturday morning we have a session, and then Saturday afternoon we have a session where it's hands-on drawing. We have a compass like this, a straight edge, and we begin to immerse ourselves in the classical methodology, in the Platonic Academy, in the Pythagorean lodges, the methods that they use to start with very simple forms like a circle, which bifurcates in a certain way and creates that vesica, the vessel, right, that launches the whole edifice of Euclidean geometry, which is the foundation of all the rest of mathematics, right? But it starts with that simple figure that we find enshrined in the tympanums over the doors of Gothic cathedrals, because there's a reason. There's a reason, because it starts from there, but then it goes more than that. It's also the gateway or the doorway into the whole metaphysical realm that presumably lies beyond the outer forms of geometry and so on. So we'll be immersing ourselves Saturday mostly into a lot of drawings. We've got, we'll be using the straight edge compass. We'll be drawing these diagrams. We'll be using color to try to help us visualize them better. Then Sunday, we'll have we'll continue with our drawing, and then we're going to do a field trip to the All Saints Chapel in Sewanee, Tennessee, which was built in a neo-Gothic style. The architect that designed it was inspired by Chartres Cathedral and Amiens Cathedral, both of which are really exemplary manifestations of the incredible miracle of Gothic cathedral building. And it's very beautiful. And so it's loaded with geometry and symbolism. We're going to go there and do a field trip there, and then we'll come back. Let's see. So this is Sunday. Then we'll come back. We'll do more sessions. We'll have Q&A. There's a nearby, a very interesting geological formation just off the site. We'll probably, on one of our breaks, we'll take an excursion over. It's called the Stone Door. We'll probably go over and have a look at that and have a little geology lesson. See, Saturday night, I think we're going to do some trance rhythms, uh,
Mm.
mostly from the dervish tradition, Sufi uh, trance rhythms that so people can bring percussions and all. It's kind of like a great way to unwind, and I will hopefully try to teach a few of these basic rhythms that we can get into because the drum rhythms are just another form of the language. And one of the things that I've always not liked about drum circles or liked about drum circles is that if you get a drum circle where you actually have drummers that know the rhythmical grammar of it, and you can get the drums actually talking to each other rather than a bunch of drums all just slapping away like a circle. Imagine a circle of people all jabbering at once, blah, 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 and there's no meaning in it. But when you get into the rhythms and uh, you know how to like syncopate those rhythms,
Mm-hmm.
etc., then you can get dialogues going, and it gets really, really rich. And so hopefully we'll get to that. I was a percussionist in a band many years ago, but I've over the last decade I've been slack on my.
Well, you were practicing today, weren't you? Or at least brushing up?
Yeah, I've been brushing up for about a month now to get my licks back, um, and I'm getting them back. And a little bit, I don't know if I'm going to have them back to where they were at. When I practice 3 hours and 4 hours a day sometimes, but um, they're definitely coming back. So that's going to be a great little outlet. We'll have, there'll be some campfire circles. This is where we probably will have tell stories and ask questions and so forth. We're going to be having a grand planetary alignment happening in the sky over our heads through the course of the whole weekend. So I'm encouraging people to bring binoculars. We can get out. We're up on the plateau. We'll have a pretty good, hopefully clear nights. We'll be able to look up there. And what I'm going to try to do is to insert people's consciousness into the plane of the ecliptic and encourage them that let this be the point where for the rest of your lives you say, I remember it was that weekend of the February of 2025 that I first became cognizant of the great wheel in the sky and began to understand its motions. And I think that's a really, really profound thing to do to get to that because this was to our ancestors, there was something they could see every night. And they became intimately familiar with the motions of what was up there and came to believe that what was happening out there affected what was happening down here. Now, I'll just say this, that wasn't purely superstitious. There is a interconnection between as above and so below, right? But so this will provide a great opportunity to start getting into understanding the motions of the cosmic wheel. Uh, so
And
that's,
what a great weekend for it to be happening.
I
People will be
know.
learning about the patterns, learning about everything you're teaching.
Yeah, the only thing missing, there's Beckett, you ain't going to be there, dude.
I know, man.
I'm going to be, yes, I'm going to be I'm going to be ragging you about this for at least a couple of years.
Well, hopefully down here I'll be able to look up. I'll be watching the live stream, so I'll be on the live stream. I've got a lot to learn there, so I'll tune into that, and hopefully, I mean, does it matter down on the Yucatan? Can I look up and will I have a good view of the grand planetary alignment?
Yes, yes, Beckett, you can. The reason is it's millions of miles away. Now, if it was a mile over your head, yeah, you'd probably be limited.
So anywhere in the world.
Well, not so much. Well, yes, 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 anywhere in the world. But you got to remember now. Okay, we're not going to get into what the flip you have to do to go from northern to southern hemisphere. Because a lot of but you can see the plane of the ecliptic from the southern hemisphere as well. But let's mention for before we adjourn here, the live stream is available, and John Arthur Fiallo and his crew, they're going to be there recording the whole thing. Um, and it's going to be downloadable. And the cool thing about this is that a lot of this is going to be not necessarily the kind of thing you get once through. Definitely encourage people, if you really want to learn how to master some of these drawings, you want to do them more than once, to master them. Hell, half a dozen, 10 times, 12 times, you sit there and say, you draw the figure of the pentagon, right? And you want to get the pentagon from the pentagram, and then you want to examine how the golden ratio is all embedded in that particular geometry, which it is. I mean, every time you draw it, you'll see new things. You'll see new layers of meaning and things you didn't catch the previous time. So when you do the live stream, you get to download it. You keep it in perpetuity. You'll have it forever, or at least, for a few decades. We hope at least, and you'll be able to watch it over and over and over again until. And so, if you're serious about wanting to learn about this, and hey, listen, it has so many applications, philosophical and practical, and everything in between, spiritual, metaphysical, that wherever you're coming from, whatever your motive is for studying it, you're going to find that there's a whole range of potential uses for it. And now this is being billed as kind of sacred geometry for the practical person, because I started using it as a builder and designer. I started using it for that. But graphic design, architects, builders, carpenters, furniture builders, quilters, stained glass technicians, the list goes on and on, artists, musicians. There's value to be had to all of that in sacred geometry. Now, what can we do in a weekend? Well, all we can do is open the door and say, here's this magnificent kingdom. Come on into the outer porch and see what and you'll get a sense of what there is if you take the further journey. So this is an introduction. That's all you can do in a weekend.
Yeah.
But hopefully, and with your help and the great team that's assembling around this, we're going to be able to put it in a form that we can get it out and inspire hopefully millions of people to say, look, here is a powerful tool of design. Here is a way of actually being able to manifest harmony and beauty in the world. And we certainly need more of that.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Okay, well, thank you everybody for tuning in. I know we didn't get to all of our questions, and I was trying to fly through them, get to many as possible, so don't take our speed run as something where we're not interested in your questions, or I'm not interested in the answers, or Randall doesn't want to answer them. We're just trying to get through in a small limited time. So thank you all for tuning in, and we hope to see you on the live stream. Thanks, Randall.
Thanks for hosting, Beckett. So good night,
course.
everybody.
Good night.